How to be a real, and take that word to real, REAL, success, and share with you 4 things that if you would improve in these 4 areas, just like I try to improve these 4 areas in my own life, honestly, your business will improve. It really will. Let me give you the background of this teaching just for a moment. When I was in my 20s, I had a mentor, Les Parrott, who had written 5 books. I had not written any books. I was not an author. In fact, I didn't have any desire to be an author. If you'd come up and ask me if I ever wanted to write a book, I'd say, well, I like to read them, but I don't particularly care to write them. But we're having lunch one day, and my mentor, Les, is talking to me about his latest book. He'd written 5 of them. And I asked him, I said, Les, why do you write books? And he looked at me that day and said, John, I write books to add value to people and influence people that I will never meet. And the moment that he said that to me, within my heart, I thought, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to add value to people. I want to reach people and help people that I'll never maybe ever personally meet in my life. And that was the catalyst for me becoming a writer. For the next 18 months, I asked myself a very, I think, important question if you're going to write a book, and that is, what should I write about? And I came to the conclusion that if I really wanted to add value to people, that I needed to ask myself and ask others, what is it that is so important in their life that would help them to be more valuable and more successful? And for the next 18 months, I asked questions, I read, I thought, I wrote down my thoughts, and I came to the conclusion, after a year and a half, that if I could help people do 4 things and improve those 4 areas, it would just greatly improve their life. And that's where the REAL comes from. The letter R, there are 4 things. The first one, the letter R, stands for relationships. And I said to myself, if I could help people really just have good people skills, it's just going to improve their life. And it's kind of like this. People won't really go along with you unless they can get along with you. And so I made a commitment that in my writing of books, and I've written 83 now, I made a commitment that I would help people learn how to get along with people. Stanford research says this: your success, my success, anybody's success in this profession, 87% of our success is people knowledge, and only 13% of our success is product knowledge. In other words, Stanford research basically says that your success and my success is going to be more determined by our ability to get along with people, add value to them, connect with them, than anything else in our life. And that is exactly what I've discovered. So I began to write books on how to be a people person and just books that would help people understand what I would call people skills, relationship rules like the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. During the Enron scandal in America in 2001, my publisher, Time Warner, asked me to write a book on business ethics, and I told them I couldn't. They asked why. I said, because there's no such thing as business ethics. There's just ethics. And then they said, well, could you write a book on ethics? I said, I'm not sure. It's hard to write a book on ethics if there's no truth or absolutes, but let me give it a shot. And I did write one. And I wrote one based on the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. And the eureka moment for me in writing that book was I found that in the business community, that if the business community began to embrace good values, that they would become more valuable. They become more valuable to themselves. They become more valuable to their customer. They become more valuable to the people in their office. And so my discovery was that values really help people help other people in a beautiful way. And caring for people and relationship values are just absolutely essential. I wrote a book several years ago called Winning with People, and one of my chapters and one of my people principles is what I call the elevator principle, which simply says some people lift you up, some people bring you down. And the question for all of us today is, what do I do? Am I an elevator that takes people to a higher level, or am I an elevator maybe with only one button on it with the letter B, which means basement, and I just take people down? Well, here's what I know about relationships and why it's so important in your life and my life. Each one of us right now, we're either a plus in people's lives or a minus. We're either an asset or a liability. We either lift people up, or, to be honest with you, we kind of bring them down. One of the things that I've concentrated on for several years now, and wanting to be good relationally with others, is a commitment that I made to intentionally add value to people. Now, I say the word intentionally because I think it's a key word. And what I mean by that is I think that we are born selfish. I know I was. And what that basically means is that I want somebody to do good things to me. And I get up in the morning and think, wow, I wonder if something good is going to happen to me. And we just naturally have kind of a selfish nature waiting for someone else to do something good for us. The reason that intentionally adding value is so important is that I naturally want people to add value to me. So I have to be very intentional if I want to add value to you. And so I began to ask myself, well, how do I become that plus in people's lives that really does add value to others around you? And I came to a system, a process in my life that really works for me. And it's a very simple one. And what's real beautiful is every one of you can do this. And it doesn't take much time, but it makes a big difference in people's lives. You see, every day there are 5 things I do that truly adds value to other people. First of all, every day I value people. That's the foundation of relationships, valuing the people that are around you. You see, if I don't value you as a person, I'm not going to add value to you. Why would I add value to a person that I don't value? So all of the positives of relationships begin with the fact that I just value you as a person. That's why I'm so delighted today to even be able to share with you for a few minutes in this topic of real success, because I value you as a person, and I believe you have greater potential. Even though already you are successful, I think you have potential to even be more successful. So it all begins with the fact that every day I value people. If I, as a leader, value people, I'll add value to them, no doubt about it. The second thing I do, I not only value you as a person, but number 2, every day, I think of ways to add value to you. I look at my schedule in the morning and I see who I'm going to be with and what I'm going to be doing. In fact, this morning, I realized I was going to come into the studio and I was going to have an opportunity to talk to all the wonderful people at Align Technologies. And I said, okay, how can I put a smile on their face? How can I give them a transformational smile and help perhaps in a positive way change their life? And I began to think about you. Now, the reason I do that on the front end is if I'm already thinking of how I can add value to you, the odds increase that I'll think of a way to add value to you. So every day I value you, and every day I think of ways of adding value to you. And thirdly, when I'm with you, I look for ways to add value to you. In other words, we all know this, but let me just maybe take a moment and just emphasize it, underline it for us. When we look at people, we don't see them as they are, we see them as we are. And so when I come to be with you, if I'm looking for ways to add value to you, guess what? I'll find ways to do that. Why? Because I'm looking for those ways. Just as, to be honest with you, if I sat down with you and I wasn't thinking or looking at any way to add value to you, the odds would be high that I wouldn't add value to you at all. Why? It wasn't in my thoughts. I wasn't looking for that. There's something incredibly powerful about when you see your clients. You're looking for ways to not only help them, obviously, with your smile and your practice, but to help them, just to help add value to them. So you're looking for ways to say the right thing, do the right thing that just would add value to them. So every day I value you. I think of ways to add value to you. I look for ways to add value to you. And every day I do things that add value to you. In other words, it's more than looking and seeing. It's doing. It's taking action. I think the most overrated words in the English language are good intentions. And I know a lot of people, they have good intentions, but they never transfer those over to good actions. And nobody ever was helped with good intentions. We're only helped when those intentions become actions. And so every day, I'm not only going to think of ways to add value to you and look for ways to add value to you, I am going to do things that add value to you. And number 5, every day, again, every day, I'm going to encourage you to add value to others. And that's what I'm doing right now. In your practice, I want to encourage you, not only help people with this transformational smile that you're going to do with their teeth, but just help people. Help people any way that you possibly can. And then encourage them to do the same for others. Here is what I know. To be successful, you and I want to have good relationships with others. In fact, I would go as far to say that as you look in your past, as I look behind in my past, honestly, the relationships that are positive in our lives are the highlights of our lives. So if you want to achieve and succeed well in any practice, remember relationships. Commit yourself to getting along well with people and connecting with them. Let's go to the letter E in the word real. That stands for equipping. To be highly successful, you have to equip other people. In fact, if it was just you and me, let's say you and I had the opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation, okay? Just you and me. If I could sit down, I would ask you 2 questions that will greatly determine the success of your business. The first question I'd ask is very simple. What are you doing to develop yourself? What's your personal growth plan? The reason I ask that question is your people can only grow to the level that you grow. Sometimes as leaders, we keep our people from developing because we've not developed ourselves. It's true that people follow the leader. So I have to be able to go high if I want my people to go high. I have to be able to go far if I want my people to go far. So the first person I need to develop is myself. Not because I'm selfish, just because the better I grow and develop, the more I can enable others to do the same thing. So question number 1 is, what are you doing to develop yourself? And now you know what question number 2 is, what are you doing to develop others? That's all about equipping your staff. And the powerful thing about equipping is that when you begin to train and equip people, you compound all of your success. You compound your time because now others are helping you do things. You compound your influence because now others are having positive impact in people's life. You compound your finances because you have other people helping you work in the business, which creates more people to take care of and greater profits. I mean, compounding is a result of training and equipping other people. Now, I wish I had time today to really extensively talk to you about equipping others. But sometimes when I talk about this subject, people say, "Wow, I don't know if I'm qualified to do that. I don't even know if I know how to do that." So let me just very briefly, in the next minute and a half, give you my 5 equipping steps, steps that I take to equip other people. And step 1 is very simple. I do it. Before I ever train you, equip you, develop you, I have to do it. Why? Because people do what people see. Leadership is visual. Pretty much, people don't do what you say, they do what you do. So my credibility of equipping you is the fact that I do what I'm going to equip you to do very well myself. That gives me credibility and it gives me influence to now train and develop you. So step 1 is I do it. Step 2 is I do it and you are with me. You see, equipping depends upon proximity. Again, leadership is visual, and so if you're with me and you're getting to watch me, you're going to learn much quicker how to do something very well. So this is where we're together, and I'm visually demonstrating to you what I want you to learn how to do. Step 3 is now you do it, and I'm with you. Isn't it interesting? There comes a time when I literally, this is a water bottle, but there comes a time where I hand that baton off to you, and you take it. And now all of a sudden, you're doing the work, but I'm still with you. I'm watching you. I'm coaching you. I'm tweaking you. Every time we're finished doing a project, whatever it is, you and I may sit down for 15 minutes and we may just kind of review what happened. And now I'm sharing with you maybe how you could even do it more effectively. But again, we're together, but now you're leading and I'm observing, coaching, and helping you. Step 4 is you do it. There comes a time you don't need to be with me. You know how to do it, and so you go. And that's always an exciting time for an equipper because now all of a sudden I have not only myself doing this job, but you're doing it too. So we've got 2. Now we're starting to add. We're starting to really kind of compound in a small way our success. Now, most equipping stops at level 4. When you can do it, what I've taught you how to do, it's kind of like, okay, I've done my job, and I go focus maybe on someone else to equip. But there's a 5th step, and I don't want you to miss it because this is the magic step in equipping people. You see, step 5 is you do it, and someone is with you. In other words, you're now equipping someone else. In fact, when I began to train and equip someone, before I ever start, I ask them if they're willing to train and equip someone after I do that for them. If they say yes, we start. If I see there's a hesitancy and they kind of just maybe aren't interested in training someone else, we don't even start. Why? I don't want my equipping to be a dead-end street. I want to equip you so you can equip others. And that's where true compounding begins. And really successful people, they get along with people really well. They're really good at the relationships, and they train and develop others really, really well. Let's go to the A, the 3rd thing that we need to do to be a real success. And that A stands for attitude. Attitude isn't everything, but it's the main thing. In fact, it's so important in your life and in my life that it's what I call the difference maker. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. If you were hiring somebody in your practice and the 2 people you were looking at, they both had good experience, they both seemed to have the skill set, and you kind of were wondering, well, which one of them do I pick? They're very equal. But let's say one had a terrific attitude and the other one did not. Who are you going to hire? You're going to hire the person that has a good spirit, a good attitude. Now, all of a sudden, when all things are equal, attitude makes all the difference in the world. And I think all of us know that coming through COVID-19, our attitude, our positive life stance is going to be absolutely essential for us if we're truly going to overcome adversity such as what we have gone through in our life. And what's powerful about attitude is that it's a choice. You and I get to choose it. I can still remember many, many years ago, I was doing a conference and my wife, Margaret, we've just been married now for 52 years, but she was with me at the conference and we were having a Q&A time. And one of the people at the conference looked at Margaret and they asked her, he said, does John make you happy? And when she asked that question, I thought, well, that's a good question. I think I'm a good husband. And then Margaret surprised me and everybody by looking right at the person that asked the question and said, no, she said, he doesn't make me happy. I mean, there was just like a pause and a gasp. And everybody kind of think, oh my gosh, Margaret just said John didn't make her happy. And I'm over there and I'm saying, hey, Margaret, honey, explain to them what you mean about I don't make you happy. She said, okay. And then she said, for the first 6 months of our marriage, that's exactly what I expected him to do. Make me happy. I was teaching school and I would come home and I'll say, we have dinner together and we'll have a wonderful evening. And he might call me and say, honey, I've got another business issue I got to take care of and I'm not going to be home until about 7. Go ahead and eat. I'll be there. Or maybe I'd have to grade papers and eat. She just said, I kept saying, it'll make me happy. It'll make me happy. And she said about 6 months in the marriage, she said, I realized it wasn't going well. And then she said, I came to the conclusion, the only person that can make me happy is me. And the moment that I choose happiness, I choose it. She said, then John has added immeasurably to my happiness. That was close. That was close. Now, what was Margaret saying? Very simple. It's a choice. Attitude is a choice. When I see a person that doesn't have a good attitude, honestly, I really don't feel sorry for them because they chose that. The attitude that you have right now, the attitude that I have right now, it's a personal choice. The good news is, if we want to, we can change it. Several years ago, I decided to develop what I call a positive life stance, and a positive life stance goes something like this. Life is filled with good and bad. That's a fact. And some of the good and some of the bad I cannot control. It's just life. And some of the good and some of the bad's going to find me. Trust me, it will. Good will find me, bad will find me. Now, here's where the difference begins to form. If I have a positive life stance about not only good but bad, both the good and the bad will get a little bit better. Just as if I have a negative life stance about the good and the good and the bad will get a little worse. And so therefore, once I understand the power of the attitude, I choose a positive life stance. And I can promise you, with COVID-19 hopefully now behind us, look back at it and ask yourself the question, what kind of attitude did I have? Because I promise you, there are some people during that very adverse, difficult situation, they improved their life. And there were some people, their life just seemed to go south. It wasn't the fact that COVID-19 hit us, it was the fact that our attitude became the difference maker. You see, what happens to me doesn't have to determine what happens within me. I can't control everything that happens to me, but I can control my attitude, the way that I think, the thing that happens within me. Attitude, essential for success. Now let's just review for a moment before I give you the last part of success. Relationships. So important to your success. The ability to get along with people. Equipping. Honestly, it's the only way that you can compound your business, by training and equipping the other people around you so they can help you carry this load that you have. Attitude, how I think about myself, how I think about you, how I think about my clients, my employees, how I think about adversity like COVID-19, determines so much whether I grow from it or I don't. So the last thing I want to talk to you about, the letter L in the word L, relationships, equipping, attitude. And you've guessed it, you know what the L is all about. It's about leadership. I'm known as the leadership expert. I've written dozens and dozens of books on leadership. In fact, it's now a fact that I've written more material on leadership than any person who's ever lived in the history of the world. I live leadership. I love leadership. I teach leadership, and here's why. The reason I started training leaders is because in my 20s, I came to a very important conclusion, of which 50 years later, the conclusion I had as a young man is stronger today as an older man. Here's what I concluded 50 years ago. Everything rises and falls on leadership. That's a fact. Not some things, not most things, everything. It's true in the healthcare business, the business that you're in. It's true in government. It's true in religion. It's true in education. Everything rises and falls on leadership. In other words, leadership has the ability to make things better, or to be honest with you, bad leadership makes things worse. There's a rising with good leadership, and there's a falling with bad leadership. Let me close with this leadership thought. In my book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, the first law that you read about as you open the pages of that book is the law of the lid, L-I-D. And the law of the lid just simply says how well you lead determines how well you succeed. That's a fact. That's true in your business. That's true in my business. That's true in every person's life. So let me illustrate it visually. Let's say I'm an average leader. From a 1 to a 10, let's say I'm a 5, okay? And let's say this hand represents my leadership lid. This is the leadership skill level of John Maxwell. These are my leadership gifts, okay? This is my lid. This is how well I lead. It's a 5. It's not a 6. It's just an average. I'm a 5. If this is my leadership lid, and this hand represents my business will come under, but never go higher. Never go higher than my leadership lid. In other words, if my leadership is a 5, my business is going to be a 4. That's a fact. You say, but you know what? I'm very skilled in my work. You perhaps are. But your leadership lid is going to determine the size of your business. Now, often I'm having people ask me, and during Q&A, they'll say, John, are leaders born? And whenever they ask me that question, I always give them the same answer. Of course they are. Just think about that question. Every leader I know is born. They're not really asking the question, are leaders born? They're really asking, are there some people that they're born with leadership gifts and skills, and so they go to the front of the line, and there are people that are born without them, and they go to the back of the line. That's what they're really asking. Is there such a thing as a born leader? And there are leaders that have what I would call, there are people that are born that would have intuitive leadership gifts to them, just like some people are born with musical gifts. So it's possible you could be born with some gifts that would help you to become a good leader. But what I really know is that you can learn how to lead. That's a fact, because leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. And the moment people break down leadership as influence and ask themselves, how do I develop and gain influence in my life? To be honest with you, at that point, they're going to be very, very successful.
You know, it's fun. As John was talking today about the 4 levels of relationship, I've said this often, Becky, I'm sure you've heard it. And I'm sure you feel the same way in getting to help carry John's legacy forward and building just this clear communication approach to growth in leadership. I am sitting here today because of the relationships. Let's call it friendships, because that's
absolutely.
how John did it. But I'm sitting here today because of the relationships I have made along the way. I stand today on Linda Egger's shoulders. She's been with John for 33 plus years. She knew me and my name before John Maxwell did, and she began to share that with John. And I think about multiple conversations you and I had in talking about how to grow together, all started with relationships with John many years before.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we do everything, right?
It is. I really appreciate that John kind of breaks down being able to categorize those relationships. Because I think a lot of people, including myself at one point, we struggle with relationships coming and going from our life as if we did something wrong or as if they did something wrong. But I was so relieved when he said you were really only going to have 5 or 6 secure relationships in your life, because I thought, oh, thank goodness, because that let me off the hook a little bit. I was worried about that. But I think all of us can relate to that. It comes with seasons, and those relationships do as well. But being able to connect with people is a gift that it's not something that most people are just gifted with. It's something you intentionally have to do. I mean, I remember, and just like you, we have kids that play sports and we follow them around, and our lives become their lives and their lives become ours and our schedules. And I would purposely make an effort to get to know the parents of these kids, and so that there was always a family or a tribe, which we're all longing for. But it was my way of forcing myself to really make connections to where anything you practice, anything you prepare for, you'll get better with over time.
You know, you mentioned that standout statement for you, that secure relationships. You only got 5 or 6. I loved right there at the end where he said that any relationship that is significant, we're talking about the law of connection, the 4 levels of deep relationship. He said they're going to have seasons or time periods, I think is how John said it, of going through each of this surface, structured, secure, solid. And I wonder, for me and podcast listeners, perhaps this applies to you, but I wonder how many relationships that I did not give a chance to because they felt stuck in one of these 4 levels.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not a surface guy, but I love surface things. I love to have a good time, but I have a better time when I know there's a little bit more depth to that relationship, or potential depth. And then yet I also think sometimes I get so intense in relationships that I don't enjoy this, or I don't allow others around me to enjoy that surface part of it because I'm just so intense.
Yeah. It's interesting because even surface, I think today, as opposed to even 20 years ago, because John even makes a reference at the grocery store, those kind of things. To me today, the perfect example of a surface relationship is social media.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times do you have friends or they follow you and they think they know you and you think you know them? And I mean, you actually someday meet them in person and you feel like you know each other, but it really is surface, because how do you truly know someone through social media? It was an experience, or they follow you, whether it's because they like the content or they just find you entertaining or whatever it is. But to me, today, that's probably a really great example of a surface relationship.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing that really struck me as John was talking is this idea of structured relationships.
Yeah.
Don't we all have this opinion that relationships should just kind of be? We should let it morph. It should just be natural or organic. And yet John gives us permission to be structured in our relationships.
Yeah.
One of the coolest things, you've been in settings like this as I have, one of the greatest things of John, in my opinion, is how when he's sitting down at dinner with someone, or when he's preparing for dinner with someone, he sits down, and now in his phone, it used to be a little notepad, he would sit down and think of the questions that would inspire relationship to develop around that table.
And think of the intention.
Yeah.
I mean, again, John is the epitome of this. He teaches us just by example all the time. But how many times do we just sit down on a plane, at dinner, next to someone, and we just want to internalize, we just want to be in our own head, and to have that intentionality that you're going to create that conversation? Who does that? Oh, wait, we're supposed to do that.
Yeah. I had a leader one time, phenomenal leader, just incredible at certain things, but struggled with the relationship side of things at times. It's kind of like John Maxwell told on his friend Dan Ryland, who's a dear friend of mine, a listener to this podcast, a great author if you have not read Dan Ryland. But he said one time, Dan, as his executive pastor way back when he was in San Diego, Dan come walking in one day and walked right past everybody, didn't say hello to anybody, didn't do anything. And John just kind of watched him go do that. And he went in his office and said, Dan, you just passed all the people. And Dan said, I know, John, I just had so much work to do. I had to get a lot of things done today. And he said, Dan, you just passed the people. And I thought about that because I was working with a leader one time, and I said, hey, I need you to walk slowly through the crowd.
Yeah.
I need you to spend time with the people, all the buzzwords that you've heard John say. And he, okay, I got it. And so I'll never forget, 1 week later, I got all of these texts. I was traveling a lot then as well. And I got all these texts and said, man, you're not going to believe it. This leader was incredible. Came by today, really acted interested in my weekend. It's a new day with this leader. The second week, you're not going to believe this. The same exact thing. It's almost like a brand new person. The third week, I got the text, said, hey, you might want to tell this leader to pick a different time of the day because now I'm starting to feel like a calendar schedule rather than anything.
Exactly.
But the point is this. I believe that great leaders, great relational leaders are structured in their relationship. They're incredibly intentional. You would never know the amount of intentionality John puts into those dinner conversations because while it's very structured, he doesn't lose the relational component of it.
Yeah. And I think he's practiced that so much that it's not even practice anymore. I mean, his intentionality has become a part of his DNA. And isn't that where we're all trying to get to? I feel like as we do that, it's interesting how John talks in this particular lesson even about how leadership is all about the people. It's not about you. And it's very easy to forget those things sometimes. And for me, the statement that I have to remind myself is if the people are the why, sometimes we have to be careful that we make the reason why we do things. We also make it the reason why not to do things. Meaning, let's say I want to build a business because I want it to be able to impact my family and I want to give them more options. But then every time they have a book fair sale, I have to be there or I'm not willing to make the sacrifice. So I make the reason why I do something. Sometimes that's the excuse why not to do something because I can't take time away from my child in order to go build this business. But then I want them to be able to someday pick the college they want to go to, not the one I can afford to go to. So there is a give and take there. And I think in leadership, we do that same thing with people. We say they are the reason why, but then sometimes we bypass it because we're making it the reason why not too.
Yeah. When you go to this next point of secure relationships, so we talked about surface, we get caught up in this, man, this is not going anywhere, and we don't cultivate it to get deeper, and we lose perhaps could be a very long-term relationship.
Yeah.
But then we go to this structured and we get really intentional with it. Well, now John's talking about these secure relationships, and you've already mentioned that there's 5 or 6 maybe in your lifespan.
Right.
But how incredible is it when you're around that person that just secures you in that relationship?
There's nothing better.
And in work life, especially those of us that are leading teams and are part of big teams, it becomes a dog eat dog, or it becomes a corporate ladder to where we're trying to climb it faster than anybody else. We're trying to compete with people rather than complete people.
Yeah.
All the buzzwords, and yet in these secure relationships that John is teaching, these very few, there's nothing better than feeling secure in a relationship, especially even a work relationship. Hey, we've got this. We're going to make it happen.
I agree. I've also found moving from a secure relationship to a solid relationship, there's a difference in, because secure, we usually surround ourselves with people that like the same things, or maybe they're of the same faith, or they have the same politics, or it's comfortable and it feels safe as well. I think where you can move secure to solid is you're not just moving with people that are for you or you fight the same fight. Sometimes it's the opposite. So there's an intention around that comfort zone. And you and I have talked a lot about that comfort zone because we've made a lot of changes in our lives to push us out of that comfort zone, whether we wanted to or not.
Right.
It took us that way. But when you're okay and can feel a safe space with people that you don't even agree with, to me, that is probably the most solid of all those relationships where you can disagree about politics, you can have different faith systems, but how you value people, how you conduct yourself, and then being okay with disagreeing, I can't think of a more solid relationship, let alone a marriage.
Yeah.
I mean, show me a marriage where they agree on everything, and I'll be like, you guys live in make-believe land.
Exactly.
And that sounds amazing, but I don't think it really exists.
That's exactly right. Get your head out of the clouds.
Yes.
Get your head out of the sand.
Stop lying to yourself.
Yes, because I love it when John talks about when he wrote the book Failing Forward, and he was going on a 10-day cruise to see the fjords of Norway. The fjords of Norway. And he goes, right before we started going, I realized it was 10 days, and it only took God 7 to create the entire earth, and we're taking 10 to view the fjords of Norway. But then he makes this funny statement that I laugh every time, and he says, and so Margaret and I talked, and we went on the 10-day fjord of Norway.
That
trip,
was
right?
the discussion.
And he said, we had a discussion, but she won. And then he follows up and says, anybody that doesn't believe in compromise has not been married for very long.
It's true.
So let's go now to this last segment, which is solid relationships. And John made a couple of points here where a long-term relationship begins to develop, complete trust and confidentiality exist. And I know this is where all of us want to get to. And can we get to it in a work environment, or is that just kind of reserved for solid relationships at a very personal level? And I just believe and am experiencing that solid relationships can work in the workplace as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think you and I are a perfect example of that. I mean, obviously some of our experiences allow us to connect to that, but I've shared things with you that I've shared with maybe 2 other people in my life. And I know we've done the same thing. So there's definitely a common connection there. But I think the basis of that are, because it's really easy for us to want to surround ourselves with people that just cheer for us all the time, agree with us all the time. But those that challenge you, but do it in a respectful way, the feeling of growing with people as opposed to agreeing with people is such a better feeling in the long term and the long run. And that's really where you can put those relationships. You know, I would say, and you included, it's not just the people that cheer for you the loudest. It's also the ones that can laugh the loudest with you at yourself at mistakes. I mean, mistakes that would mortify the public to know that we've made. And we can laugh with each other about them because there's growth in that. There's also a safe space in that. We've understood it. We've experienced it. And I hope everyone has experienced that. What's really hard is knowing that there are people that haven't. So giving them the tools and giving them kind of the parameters of what that looks like. John just does a beautiful job, which he always does. He takes the complicated, he makes it simple. We can all digest it. But the difference is hearing all of these things. And what I hope the podcast listeners and our Maxwell Leadership family understand is there's such a difference in getting information and applying it to, man, my husband needs to hear this. Man, my sister needs to hear this. My best friend needs to hear this. When you get this level of just principles and content, the best thing you can do is it always applies to you. And then that radiates throughout you. And for me, that's been an ongoing process. There's still moments that I still want to fix everybody around me, realizing, oh, no, that means I need to fix myself even more.
That's exactly right.
That's exactly where it goes back to.
Well, you know, and I'll close here, but let me say this. When you talk about, you made a great statement there that I want to expand on just a moment here. You said it's really important that we determine to grow with people rather than agree with people when we're talking about the solid relationship piece. And John said this, he said, when conflict is handled incorrectly, he said this in the teaching today, when conflict is handled incorrectly, the relationship will digress. It will go back. But when conflict is handled appropriately and correctly, the relationship will always go to the next level. And I thought, how true is that? One of the coolest things, Becky, I'll never forget this, when we were trying to figure out how do we structure a way for us to go build something to build John's legacy together. And you said, Mark, let me tell you this. When you have a challenge, bring it to me because that's when I will respect you the most.
Absolutely.
And you've lived up to that. When there is something that we don't agree on, and we don't always agree. When there's something we don't agree on, and I bring that with care and candor, like we've talked about many times on this podcast, when I bring that in a way, it always strengthens our relationship. It always takes us to that solid place. And I wish everybody could understand
Me
that
too.
because the people that can't handle conflict, they think the relationship is unstable in
Yes.
moments of conflict rather than realize the significance
But
of
you
it.
realize what that says subconsciously. It says, I don't trust your maturity level to handle me bringing you this. So for me, when you bring that to me, all it does is reaffirm your belief in who I am, what I can handle. It's actually a confidence builder instead of the same. So emotionally getting to a place where someone trusts you enough to bring that to you, even if it's at first it stings, knowing that someone respects you enough to bring you some of the biggest problems in their life or the biggest conflicts or the biggest disagreements, you really have to take that as a compliment that someone recognizes what you are capable of.
Boy, that's so true. It reminds me, I was looking at, if you're watching the video, you saw me. I'm looking through, there's a helpful quote here from John O'Donohue. He says, real friendship or love is not manufactured or achieved by an act of will or intention. Friendship is always an act of recognition. And I believe we're truly recognized when we can, with security, give a point of view that not everybody else in the room is sharing.
Yeah.
It's too many times to where we're not really recognized because we're trying to fit in. We're trying not to become chaotic in our opinion or disruptive in a
Absolutely.
leadership team. And yet what John O'Donohue is saying is friendship is always an act of recognition. Now he has push this to the next level, in my opinion, of how do we develop solid relationships. Our standout statement today for you would be this: working together means winning together. And so now, Becky, I mean, you and I have had the chance for almost a year, we're coming up on a year, of getting to experience leadership in a work environment the Maxwell way.
Yeah.
And the whole time I'm reading these 5 points: mutual enjoyment, respect, shared experience. I'm going to try this word as a Southern guy: reciprocity. What a great job, Mark. And then this idea of trust. And I'm sitting here, Becky, and I'm realizing as we speak how well our team is doing on these. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, you bring all of these values to the forefront. It's very easy for us to look at our own experiences and almost rate them and grade them and find out where we're dipping through. It reminds me of going to church on Sunday and you're thinking, am I being punked? Like,
Yeah.
Did the pastor get a note passed that this is directly for Becky
Yes.
and you're supposed to evaluate all of this aspect in your life today? It's easy to hear that and recognize where the gaps are and where we need to fill in. And from somebody who has been in Maxwell's world, but really been in Maxwell Leadership world most recently over the last year, it has been so reaffirming to know that those principles really are applied to people and valuing people at the center of all of those. But I think this is a great way to really go back and evaluate certain relationships in your life. And it gives you maybe permission to move them from solid back to structure, or from,
agree.
secure back to just structured. So it's kind of a great time. And I think it's important to evaluate relationships. Either now you decide I need to put time and effort into that relationship, or maybe I don't. And again, that phase kind of comes and goes throughout our life.
You know, one of the things, and I love all of you for your comments, and you step up to John and I all the time and talk about the podcast and its impact. And I never get accustomed to women and men stepping up and saying, that really helps me. One of the things, Becky, that I hear often is what you just said, and that is, we love the practical applications of how you are applying what John's talking about. And you just mentioned going from solid to structured, and I was reminded both last week and then as I reflected this week on this podcast, I was reminded that surface has a place in relationships too.
Yeah.
The ability to have fun. In fact, John says in one of the 5 signs of solid relationship, mutual enjoyment.
Yeah.
The ability to just have a good time. We opened up our Florida offices. We've had a team and a presence down there for many years. But we felt like we needed to up-level our team dynamic, our brand, our image, and what we're trying to communicate in our Florida offices. And this idea of mutual enjoyment, Becky, I watched as you flew in from Utah. I watched as Deb and Gino flew in from New York. And I watched us converge on our team in Florida as a leadership team and just kind of bring enjoyment, mutual enjoyment to this ribbon-cutting experience in the office. And I went, hey, we're living out John's principles with that.
Absolutely. It definitely helped that we have a team of people that help prepare all of that for us. But when we get together, half the time we have to get back on topic because we just really enjoy being around each other and catching up. And there's this family reunion type of feel. And I know it's felt all throughout all the umbrellas of Maxwell Leadership. But it's important. It's important to enjoy the journey, not just the accomplishment or just the process. I mean, the process has to be a part of the goal, not just the outcome.
Well, and I watched you, Becky. I watched John. John says, hey, Mark, what are you doing tomorrow? You're in West Palm Beach. I'm in his backyard. He lives in West Palm in the winter. And he said, what are you doing? I said, well, we're opening our new office. It's a ribbon cutting. Can I come? I said, of course, you can always come, John. I said, I didn't ask you because you're busy. You just got home. He and I have been traveling a lot. He said, no. I want to be there. And of course, he came, and he always makes every party so much better. But I watched him pull you aside and talk about something that he and Margaret is working on, their new place, and you guys just having this brilliant fun time. And I went, that's what mutual enjoyment looks like.
There are just those moments where you almost have these inside jokes because you can relate to something. And it is different for everyone. We all have people that we just naturally lean towards because there's just that mutual enjoyment of just simply being in each other's presence. And then on the other side, do you have a friend? I have a friend like this where some people look at you kind of like, why are you guys friends?
Yeah.
Maybe they're what I call, which I hate this term, but they're too much for some people.
Yeah.
And for me, I love that someone is just authentically them. Even if it offends other people to a point, I love seeing someone just own who they are, love who they are. They're not worried about how other people are processing them. And there's just that mutual enjoyment aspect. And I don't know if it's pure entertainment or it's just a level of respect, but I think it's important to have people around us like that.
Yeah, I'm that friend, by the way. I'm the friend that everybody goes, why are you friends with them?
Yeah, so if you don't know who that person is in your life,
you're
that person.
That's exactly right. If you do not know that's you. It's you. Hey, let's talk a little bit about, I do want to go. I don't want to run out of time today before we get to the final two things, but I do want to talk about this concept of shared experiences.
Yeah.
You know, one of the biggest things that I love about John, and having traveled with him now, as of last month today, May 1st of 2022 was my 22-year anniversary.
Wow.
And what I love about John, of all the things, in the top 5 would be his ability to create memories. Now, in this lesson is shared experiences, but I will tell you, there is a bonding that happens. We were just recently at a golf experience with an incredible, gifted, talented human being that's brought a lot of people of faith into a worship environment. And in this environment, we began to kind of share a new experience with a new circle of friends. And I posted this Facebook post with Chris Tomlin and his wife Lauren and John. And some of you follow us on social media, whether it's Instagram or Facebook. And there was this sheer joy.
There was. I saw
because
the picture.
You saw it. Because of the shared experience of accomplishing something, both of them, and what little bit of role I got to play in it as well. What none of us knew that we could accomplish together. We knew we had just accomplished something that was 2.5 times greater than our highest hope of accomplishment.
Wow.
And the sheer joy when that number and that accomplishment was announced, I just was able to capture it.
Yeah.
We didn't shoot a lot of pictures that night. It wasn't really appropriate. But that one, I was just like, y'all got to do that again. I got to post that because it's this shared experience. Was the results great, Becky? Absolutely. I could bore you with all the details. It wouldn't bore you, but I'm not going to take the time here. It was incredible.
Yeah.
But the greatest part of that evening was the shared experience part.
And you got to do it together.
Together.
You weren't by yourself. You had a moment where you could see it on their face and your face, and again, that's the moment that will stick with you forever.
Let me tell you this. Recently, I'm going to talk about another moment. I was at High Point University with Nito Cobain, and it's a round table, and you've already heard the leadership team meeting, so you know exactly where I'm going. I've heard John say often that leaders' greatest disappointment at the end of a great experience is that they don't have somebody sitting beside them, right? I mean, we get these things, and maybe you're even watching this podcast. Maybe you bought the book, the new 25th edition, but you haven't bought it for somebody. I'm telling you, you are missing the joy of shared experiences. I sat at that Nito Cobain round table, and the whole time I could barely even concentrate on how powerful the experience was because I said, my entire leadership team should be here with me.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about with shared experiences. My challenge to you, to me today, is what are you experiencing that would go to the next level if you would just share it with somebody? Again, maybe it's as simple as this book. And for those of you that are listening, I'm holding up the new edition of the 25th edition of the 21 Laws of Leadership. Don't dig into that book by yourself. Don't go through the digital product by yourself. And I know you're going to go to the show notes and hear more about getting that. Don't go to events by yourself because the power of solid relationships is in the shared experiences.
It is. And you even recognizing, having that thought in that moment that you wished your lead team was there very easily moves us into that second sign of respect because of the level of respect that you have for your team and your ability to recognize not only their capabilities, but their potential shows that sign of respect. You know, when he actually quotes, you can't make another person feel important if you secretly feel they are a nobody, almost hurts my heart.
Yeah.
That not only is that happening, but that we've all done it at some point, if we're honest with ourselves, and recognizing that everyone has something to contribute and that we can learn something from everyone. I mean, that's just the basis of that foundation. But in regards to your lead team, they have proven to you time and time again who they are, their heart of their intentions, what they want, that your vision always aligns, which means you're on the right path. But that respect is reaffirmed through time. It's not just something that happens one time, I think, in this signs of solid relationship. It's something that's reaffirmed through growing experiences.
Yeah. Let's move into reciprocity.
You got it.
I nailed it. Reciprocity. Let's get into this because too often, I've been in one-sided relationships.
Yeah.
And I've been on the side of relationship where I felt like I was the only one receiving. So I'm not acting like I'm this big provider for everybody.
Right.
There's been times to where I did not feel like I was bringing anything to the table. And yet in leadership teams, it is incredibly important
Absolutely.
that we allow others the opportunity to feel like they're contributing. My mind, as John was teaching that, went back to my 20-year-old nephew. Recently lost his dad unexpectedly, and so he's allowed me to kind of step in and be a little bit of a business life mentor to him. And when I have some time, Tyler Cole calls me and he asked me this question or that question. And so I guess it was a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months now, he called and said, "Hey, I've got some questions, but I would really like to ask you in person. Do you have any time where you're in town?" And I looked on my calendar and it was a Saturday that popped up. And so Tyler Cole came up and picked me up at the house, and he wanted me to drive with him in his car. And so I said, okay. And we went to a restaurant, and he said, "Now listen, before you order, I just need you to know I need to buy this."
Oh.
And I went, "Oh, I cannot do that," because
I
I knew,
know.
listen, Becky, I knew I was going to order the cheapest thing on the menu, and I don't want the cheapest thing on the menu. We're acting like I'm all nostalgic. I wanted something really special, but it was a little more costly.
Yeah.
And I just went through this whole thing, and then almost immediately, this idea of reciprocity came into my mind, and I went, I'm getting ready to give him something with his questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to make him feel more valued and feel like my contribution to him would be more value if I let him pay.
Yeah.
And so I did. He's told me like 2 times since, I am so thankful you let do that. Well, every one of us, Becky, every one of us want to feel like we're contributing. And on the flip side, every one of us leaders want to make sure everybody is contributing, right?
Yes.
I mean, don't put me around people that are not bringing something to the table.
But reciprocity, I said that right?
You did.
Now I'm questioning if I said it right.
I'm bringing you down, Becky. I'm bringing you down.
Reciprocity. Now, getting me to say it with a Southern accent, that's a whole another issue. But it is a two-edged sword in one aspect that you want to be in a relationship that what's given is what's received. Mm-hmm. But for some of us in a leadership position that are very used to doing and executing and carrying, we also love, a part of our love language is doing things for other people. Right. Sometimes it's hard to receive that. And just like you noticed, it would have taken away from the experience had you paid for it or demanded to or said, no, that's what I do. And you wanted to own that level of giving as well. It's something that my friends tease me about if I'm throwing a party and they all ask what they can bring in. I'm like, no, just come with your cute self. I got this covered. And finally, they just kind of sat down and they're like, Becky, stop it.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to do everything for everyone. And I recognized that they wanted to bring these things. They wanted to make my life not just easier, but better and contribute. And I was stealing that from them. Yeah. Not even knowing, because we've been doing for so long.
It stems for me, this concept of really struggling with reciprocity is it goes back to John, his dinner being bought by somebody in his organization over and over again. And when it was time for him and Margaret to leave, they came to him and they said, after all we've done for you, you're going to leave us like this. And so there's really something nostalgic, maybe even something controlling by us leaders that want to just handle everything.
What are you saying, Mark?
I looked at you, but I was looking at you because you're co-host with me. But there is this controlling factor for sure. But I will tell you, until you learn this concept of allowing others to bring to the table and feel like they're contributing, you will not have that solid relationship you want. Because if it's ever just one-sided, whether that's you as the leader always feeling like you're giving, you're going to want something back at some point. Or whether you're the one always receiving, you're never going to feel like you're authentically bringing something to the table.
Yeah. And I think over time, that's where those solid relationships happen, is you recognize there is a balance between those things. Because if you're doing and someone's not returning or even receiving it, there's going to be a resentment that builds up over time. And then how do you have a healthy relationship with that? So I definitely, from what you have modeled, Mark is the epitome of, in our lead team meetings, sitting back and really listening and making an effort to be the last one to contribute for several reasons. One, he wants to honor the leaders in that room. But two, I think because of his level of influence, he tries not to influence someone up front. Like, he really, truly wants to know your thoughts and what direction you would go on this, and creating that space. Again, it leads into all of those things. I mean, I'm going to have a great experience for the mutual experiences. It shows respect. We're now sharing an experience that we reciprocated all of those things. And then we can move into that trust aspect. And it shows that you trust us enough to be in a safe space to, even if we don't agree, but to at least voice it. Yeah.
I appreciate you complimenting me, because this last point, I'm going to just bring myself right back down to ground, because John says the 5 signs of a solid relationship, and he finishes it with number 5, trust. And you were in a meeting with me recently to where I attempted to make right a situation that I feel like not only violated what I say on this podcast, I feel like it violates John's relationship, John's content. I believe it violated some leaders on my team, and I think the ones that really suffered the most was our team members that were lost in the reality of a lack of trust. So let me explain. And again, thank you for saying something nice about me so people won't tune out now and go, that guy is a loser. But I realized something. We teach around here, Becky, and you know this and you live this, that when you ask somebody to do something, whether you empower them for a project or a position, we established that we vetted everything we needed to vet when we assigned or empowered that responsibility to that individual. And so trust is at the all-time highest it can be. It's
Absolutely.
at 100%.
Yeah.
John calls this, for all of you podcast viewers and listeners, John calls this putting a 10 on everyone's head. You have a 10, you have a 10. It's yours to prove that I was wrong in putting a 10 on your head. We do the same thing with trust.
Yeah.
If we have properly vetted, interviewed, or observed a human being to join the team or to take over ownership of a project, they deserve 100% trust.
Yeah.
Well, I violated that. I asked somebody to handle something in our organization, actually human resources. I asked them to own it. It was owned differently at the leadership level. It was owned differently with a daily administrative level. And I never could get comfortable that they could treat human resources, treat the culture that I have fought for 22 years as good as me or a couple of people that had been around me a long time, right?
Yeah.
And that's normal. There's nothing bad with that.
Normal.
But it's wrong. It's wrong.
Yeah.
And I asked them, I said, okay, it's yours. They talked me into restructuring and reassigning. And I said, okay, it's yours. It's yours. It's yours. But the whole time, every time there was a little bump or there was a little challenge or a little ripple, I'd go, hey, have you checked with this other person? Hey, why didn't you check with me on that? How many love that leader that says it's yours, but check with me before you do everything?
Yeah.
Check with me before you think.
It's not very fun.
It's not very fun. And I did this. And I did it over and over again until that leadership behavior by me began to wear out the team's ability to feel comfortable in what they knew to do to help people. And we had a huge challenge, a challenge that if you dealt with just the behaviors or the decisions in the situation would have been terrible.
Right.
But fortunately for me this time, I wish I could get it right every time. Fortunately for me this time, I went, whoa, wait. I don't want to talk about the details of messing it up. I want to talk about what caused the missteps in the first place. And what I discovered was it was my inability or my lack of determination or my lack of commitment to give trust on the front end. I was waiting for trust to be earned. And by doing that and micromanaging that, I, the senior leader who had violated the trust commitment that I make with people, had created the problem.
Yeah.
Now, you said in that meeting, you watched our team really rally around that. But I think my biggest point that I want to make here is that truly for there to be solid relationships, for me, Becky, for you, for our team, for you, podcast listener, podcast viewer, you will not have solid relationships without this trust factor.
It's true.
And I don't believe trust is earned. I believe trust is given. And I believe trust is established after the leader extends trust.
Yes.
But so many times as leaders, we go, you got to earn my trust.
Right.
And in leadership, I don't believe that's
It's
accurate.
got to be opposite. So I agree. The same way that optimistically, you always give people the benefit of the doubt until they prove you wrong, and you might have to adjust some boundaries. I think trust should be the same way.
Yep.
And when we are equipping leaders, I mean, if you have a team of people that you're equipping as well, being able to give them that is everything. It's also how they see themselves through your eyes. So what you're allowing them to do is what you're telling them you believe. I'll give you an example. I'm a huge University of Utah fan. My husband's alumni. We go to every football game. We buy way too many tickets, even if they're winning or losing, but I love it. Coach Whittingham, who is the head coach, there was a young man one year. His job is to just punt, return. Like that's all he does. Catches the ball, runs it back. They punt it, he catches it, they run it back. For people that are not football fans, I'm just breaking it down. Try not to get too technical. This young man had broken almost all the records at the school for punts returned. touchdowns. I mean, 100-yard touchdown, which is almost unheard of in football altogether. Well, there was one particular game where, again, punted off, he caught it, he ran it back, and it was like a 98-yard touchdown. And right before the end zone, sometimes these young men do the celebration thing where they throw the ball back under them. And he had done that. So in his mind, he had crossed the goal line and had thrown the ball back. Well, the ref, nobody blew their whistle. Everybody in the crowd's going crazy. They're yelling, they're screaming, there's a touchdown. And the ball is on the ground. It's a live ball because he never crossed the threshold with the ball, which is an actual technical touchdown. One of the kids on the other team, I mean, this is like 30 seconds, 60 seconds, ball's just on the ground. Ref is just standing there looking at the ball, not blowing his whistle. And one of the kids on the other team realizes that's a live ball, picks it up, runs it all the way down, and the ref calls a touchdown.
Wow.
The whole crowd, it was silent. Have you ever been in an arena with tens of thousands of people and it's completely silent? This was that moment. Now, everybody in the crowd, after watching it on the big screen, thought, you better kick that kid out of the school, let alone off the field. I mean, they were just ready to take him. Coach Whittingham, as a leader, knew, because guess what happens after a touchdown? Somebody kicks the ball again, and you have to return this kick. Coach knew to put that kid right back out on the field.
Wow.
I don't think there's a moment he'd probably been more mortified or questioned his ability or his ego had been bruised. I mean, it was probably the lowest of the low moment. And Coach Witt said, nope, this is your job. Brush it off. You get back out there. And you should have seen everybody in the crowd. Like, I'm pretty sure they booed their own player when he came back out. It was that bad. And that kid had to catch the ball. But as leaders, it's so easy for us to say, I'll pick it up, or I'll adjust, or I'll just make other arrangements. But imagine what it says to that young man to say, no, you made a mistake. Yeah. That's all that was. Yeah. And to give them that self-confidence and to push them through. I mean, that gives you so much perspective in life. I mean, whether that's your child or that's, someone in your leadership team. But trust on both sides has to work. So they've proven through time that you can earn more trust, I think, that you can give them more. They're capable of more. You've been able to see that with your own eyes. But I think the second part to trust is forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Because nobody's perfect. I mean, the Mark Coles, the Becky Purcells, the John Maxwells, as great intention as we have, as much as we've learned, as many books as we've read, we're still going to make mistakes. So being around people that also understand that the flip side to trust, or that second phase, is forgiveness and letting it go, and then re-empowering. And there'll be several times that you re-empower. Now, if you have to re-empower too much, you can start to question, maybe I've given them a little too much trust in that process. And the worst thing that can happen is somebody who just gets really good at apologizing and doesn't get good at changing their actions. So trust it's a big category in that aspect.
It is.
The willingness, and it speaks a lot to you, Mark, the willingness to recognize that about yourself and then to share that, not just with our lead team, but to all the world in the podcast. I mean, you're just rebuilding, and you're establishing trust. You've reaffirmed it, and it is an ongoing process. It's not something you do once. It's not like you got married at the altar and now it's fine. You don't have to work on it at all. Like, it's a relationship.
Welcome back. For those of you viewing, welcome to the studio. It's good to be in the studio with you, Chris. I'm so glad you're here, buddy. Yeah. For those of you listening in, join us sometime and notice that Chris has a voice for radio and a face for YouTube. I'll tell you that. Hey, while John was talking, I thought about a Chris Hogan quote that I've heard. Great leaders focus on equipping their teams. It is unfair to expect what you did not equip. Yeah. And it brings me to what we really want to deliver to you today, and that is equipping others is the only way to grow big and to become bigger. And Chris, that's exactly we talk about here at Maxwell Leadership. We talk about we want to be bigger, better, brighter. Our best days are not behind us. Yeah. We're leaning in. We're stretching toward the next level of impact. We've got the next summit of accomplishment in our view. And I think John's telling us today, you and I, to get there, better start figuring out how to equip people.
Yeah, it's a multiplication of what you desire to do as a leader, right? And John has taught us this along the way, where we don't want to develop followers. It's back to why we do what we do, right? We want to develop leaders. So we want to add value. I love what you talked about with Bob early as we introduced this episode. What I love about that is Bob's in his mid-70s and still learning.
I love it.
And still growing so that he can develop other leaders. And so I love that. While he was talking, I was thinking about his book, The Leader's Greatest Return. I was with an organization last week, and I brought that book up because everybody's like, man, when you think about business and you think about leadership, and you're like, what is the return on investment? And what John gets to at the heart of this lesson in that book is it's about developing and equipping people. Now, before we dive in and I pull some stuff just from what you're experiencing as a leader, I want to share with our audience, those that are watching and those that are listening, some statistics that I think will just kind of wake us up to the importance of the topic today. Gallup says that out of 10 people that are promoted, okay, 1 out of those 10, they have high talent to be able to lead other people, okay? 2 out of those 10 have functioning talent. The other 8, it needs to be developed in them.
Wow.
And so when you look at that and you think about your team and your people and those that are on your team, 8 out of 10 need you or your leaders to be equipping them. The other thing it said that I think is just important is they said only 40% of people feel like they have a chance to learn and grow at work, and only 33% feel someone at work encourages their development. Now, John talks about the law of the lid. And I think in organization and in teams, our lid is this topic right here, is equipping. So I want to start off about the fact that John, number 1, says that equipping has to be the number 1 responsibility of a leader. Mm-hmm. Now, listen, you are crazy busy. You're running multiple companies. Talk to us a little bit about how do you think about that and how do you act on that, of that being your number 1 responsibility to be able to build this legacy that you're building, standing on the shoulders of John, with our organization. How do you go about that? How do you manage that? How do you find time for that? What does that look like in your schedule?
Well, so I want to answer that, Chris, and I want to answer it this way, because as John was talking today, and we didn't even mention this really in our pre-comments with one another and our incredible team that helps you and I do these podcasts, but I think first a leader has to really understand what I believe is a big difference between equipping, empowering, and delegation.
Absolutely.
Okay,
that's
so
good.
we're going to save equipping because that's where we want to go today. But let me tell you the difference between empowering and delegation. I delegate the things I don't want to do that people should be able to do, and I want to get rid of that, and I want it out of sight, out of mind. Yeah. And so I delegate. You and I have worked for leaders in our past that they were chief delegators. Yeah. They didn't care if you had the power. They didn't care if you had the resources. They just cared that you had the responsibility. They didn't give you power. They didn't give you resources. They just gave you responsibility. And there's nothing more frustrating with a leader than to be delegated something to with no power and no resources.
That's good.
Now, empowering is a little bit better because we don't just delegate. We actually give you the authority. You have the authority. I have been here with John. He's now promoted me to the CEO. And Chris, I want you to be over business developing and merging and acquisition with the organization. And I look at everybody that says, whatever Chris says, it's me saying it. He has the power to do that. And you do quite well sometimes. But then there is a time to where you have been empowered, but you don't have the resources.
Right.
I think that's where equipping is what John's trying to do. Equipping is giving you the power and the resources and the experience. In other words, we'll find out a little bit later in the lesson that a really good equipping strategy makes sure that you have experience before you have responsibility. Delegation, there is no experience. You just have responsibility. Most of the time with delegation, resources are not even thought. And so when I'm listening to this lesson, I put it in a very high level of leadership called equipping, not empowering, not delegation. Let's now answer your question, because it's different every time we get a new role and responsibility.
Yeah.
This is true confessions. And by the way, every Wednesday I feel like it's confession time for Mark Cole. The things I need to work better
It's actually an intervention that the organization has decided to implement.
Chris comes in as an ambassador for all of our
enterprise.
leadership every Wednesday
right.
to try to get me back on track.
Yeah.
And today's really no exception because the pace that I'm running, the pace that we all are running, is causing me to shortcut equipping. And you can't shortcut equipping. Again, John's going to show us, John did show us in the lesson a little bit earlier, that there is a distinct process. That's the 5 M's. There's a distinct process that you have to go through for equipping, and you can't shortcut it. Recently, we added to our team an operational leader. I've never had for a long time, I shouldn't say never, but for a long time, we've not had a chief operating officer, a operational leader. And I was cautioned by my business advisors before we hired Matt. And they said, trust me, you're going to want to delegate, equip, empower, all those things in 6 months. But it's taken you 22 years of leading operations to get where you are, and you can't do that in 6 months. And I'm discovering, Chris, that in my own world of trying to equip, I lose the number one responsibility of equipping people at this stage in my life and replace that number one priority with holding them accountable. But I'm holding them accountable to something that I have yet to equip them, and I'm frustrating all of us. And that's where I think that every leader has to understand when they move to the next level of responsibility and they want to get to doing the things that their new appointment is requiring of them, they still cannot shortcut or reprioritize the fact that all leaders need a number one priority of equipping others.
Yeah. It's interesting. You just talked about frustrating others. When you were going through and you're talking about, and I love this, you were talking about the difference between delegation, empowerment, and then this equipping. And what I loved about it is I was like, oh, it's an aha moment for me personally, because you were talking about these differences. And for me, I was like, if I go down this route of someone delegating something or empowering me, there's more frustration in that from my leader to me that I feel towards my leader than if there is true equipping. And then you just added on top of that where you talked about not only do I need to equip them, but then I need to make sure I stay in equipping and not just holding them accountable to that. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a great illustration for that.
You know, I before we move to the next point, Chris, I mean, John gives us 3 questions here in this point. You may even have some comments on this, and I want you to make them because you've been in the organization a long time. But I mean, think about if every leader that's listening to this podcast or watching it would do what John challenged us to do right now. Mic drop, podcast over, go to work. And it's these 3 questions. How much time do I spend weekly equipping others? And Chris, while John was teaching, I went back in the Rolodex in my mind. That's an old word for you young people that means a big old Rolodex thing on your desk of just memories or contacts was what it was most of the time. But I went through and shuffled through my mind really quick, and I went, last week, how much time did I spend equipping? Oh, it was that silent in my mind. I don't think I spent any time last week equipping. In the season that we're in, foul, throw the penalty, 15 yards back. I'm going to look today at my calendar and say, how much time am I spending equipping? And then the other question is how many people are we equipping? I've got in my mindset now, I've got 1 or 2 people that I need to be equipping so that I can get some things off my plate, rather than who can I equip to help me reach for the future. I'm trying to equip a select few to help me with my present challenges. And as CEO, if I don't keep equipping people for our future rather than equipping people to get my current schedule in check, I'm going to lose the ability to grow bigger. That was convicting to me, dude. And then finally, this third question, how many people are we equipping, goes back to that same thing. Man, I'm just equipping just a couple right now, and I am paralyzing or stymieing our growth for the future the smaller my pool of equipping is.
That's good. I appreciate the transparency. I'm going to jump in this boat with you because as I listen to John and even now just our conversation, I feel convicted as a leader inside the organization when I look at those questions. And so no doubt one of the takeaways for you, whether you're watching us today on YouTube or you're listening to us, is to really get alone and answer those questions transparently. Then maybe even ask some of your top key leaders to answer them on your behalf and see where there is a gap for that. Here's where I was thinking when you were just talking about that. I read an article some time ago where Harvard Business Review said 85% of the time of most successful leaders, they interviewed and studied 200 leaders across the board. I don't know the filter of what they decided, but 85% of their time was focused on the EQ side of leadership, the emotional intelligence and connection with their people. 85% of the time.
Wow.
You and I are sitting here saying we're convicted because we don't even know if one day we spent. Now, did we do some emotional intelligence connections? We did. But did we get specific about the equipping side? I don't know that we have. And so I would challenge each and every listener and viewer to really have a conversation with yourself about that, because that's how we do multiply the impact of what you want to do. Now,
and let me go to that. I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Jake, just pause the clock because we got so much to talk about. But let me, right before you were a part of this same conversation, Jared Cagle's in the studio with us. He helps me with content. He helps us all with content. Right now, he's helping John with this new book, drum roll. You can't wait for it. It's going to be The Laws of Communication. Can't wait to open that up. And he was talking about John jumping on a plane. We've both got an international trip that we're preparing for currently at the time of recording. And John taking time to make sure that he spends time equipping somebody that is going to give him back some things that he needs on this trip. I was recently on a trip with John and Jared where John was laying out with Jared, these are the things that I need. This is what will help me. And then he's following up and saying, hey, as Jared said in studio a while ago, 10 o'clock a.m., 10 o'clock a.m. I'll tell you, it wasn't news to Jared. 10 o'clock may have been news to Jared, but that the timeline was coming wasn't, because a month ago we were on a plane and I heard John preparing Jared for that. You never get to establish, back to me and you playing the conviction card, you never get too successful in life that you don't have to be intentional in equipping.
Yeah.
This weekend's expectation of Jake, have it to me by 10, began a month ago on a plane of equipping because there was intentionality around equipping. So you made a point there that, equipping is important, but intentionality around that equipping is the thing that's going to make it feel less like delegation and unrealistic expectation, because intentionality and due diligence was done in the equipping process.
That's good. And not only intentionality, but in that story you're just talking about, the why behind 10 o'clock is coming, right? Because then if you explain the why to the team members and you bring them along in that process, it doesn't feel like a project, a timeline, a delegation. They feel part of it. So I love that. Now I want to move on to point number 2, which, by the way, we're not going to cover all 4. Jake doesn't let us cover all the content once we're in here together. But I love this because I think you have to then communicate the priority of this to the organization. You know, the last question that you just reviewed for us that John talked about is, how many people then are they equipping? So in this conversation, you're my leader. So your question to me is, how many people are you equipping in order to help us accomplish this mission, this vision we're after? You said this statement. I want to share this with our audience. In one of our leadership team meetings, you came in and you didn't even say hello. You didn't even say, hey, how's everybody's weekend? Whatever. You came in and you said, all right, here we go. You couldn't be here today. Who's sitting in your seat?
Wow. Yep.
And all of us were like, don't pick on me. And you were just like, go. Who is it? Chris, who is it? Right? And so, Becky, who is it? Whatever. And I was like, man, like that. Yeah, that's so good. If we were doing this in a way that we should be doing it as leaders of our organization, we would have it right there. But what you were doing was you were implementing and living out this, hey, I'm going to communicate. This is a top priority for all of our people. So talk about that. Talk about the desire that you have as a CEO of the enterprise to make sure that your people and that you are continually emphasizing and communicating the power, and not only the power, but the need, Because it's so critical to be developing and equipping your people.
Well, it's so funny because our podcast family is going to think that I'm just this cutthroat, going to kill everybody, cut everybody out, fire everybody kind of leader. I don't think I'm like that, but
No,
maybe
you're not.
I need to go check, because let me
You're
tell you
not.
why I say that though, Chris. A week ago today, I'm in a meeting with two of our leaders. You were not even in the meeting. And I said, guys, who's your replacement? And they looked at me like, what? And I said, oh, by the way, if something happens to me, who's my replacement? What are y'all going to do if something happens to me?
Yeah.
Now, that's kind of fatalistic, right? And it's so funny that you just reminded me, I'd forgotten about that. You reminded me of a meeting several months ago where I challenged every leader. First thing came into the meeting was, hey, who's your replacement? What are you going to do? And then I just had that same conversation a week ago. I think, and I justify it with this, the law of the bench. Every leader is prepared. Surprises don't prepare leaders, it reveals leaders. I use all of these illustrations, and that was certainly my point 7 days ago with these leaders. Guys, who are you training for the unexpected? Who is your law of the bench? And I began to articulate to them what I may not have articulated in this leadership meeting that you're referencing. I believe it's the responsibility of every leader to know his players and to strengthen the bench of players on the team. That's not anything earth-shattering or great revealing, I'm sure, to our podcast audience. What's revealing to me when you ask this question today is I told both of those leaders last week who I would replace them with if something happened to them. Now, I was in this meeting, I was really challenging them because we're not moving the ball forward as quickly as I feel like that we should. And I was going, guys, who is your replacement? And be inviting them into it because they probably can make you better. So it wasn't just let's find a replacement. It was who else is brainstorming with you because your replacement may have better ideas than you because you're too close to the challenge.
Yeah. Love that.
But as I'm listening to you ask me that question today, as I'm reminded that I asked that question again 1 week ago, which means I may be asking that question way too much, I realized that while I have a plan on who would be their replacement, I have no intentionality on how I am equipping them today. So what am I going to do, Chris? Am I going to wait to equip my bench when they're actually in the game? Or am I going to equip them while they're on the bench so that if an injury happens, they're able to get right in? Your son plays football. You played football. No coach waits until the injury to equip the second string. The second string is making the first string better by learning the game plan, by scrimmaging with them. In the leadership game, in mine and your company, podcast listeners, are we scrimmaging enough with the backups to make sure that they are equipped when they become a starter?
Yeah.
And I'm telling you this right here, I need to quit recording a podcast and go equip some people because I've got a plan.
Yeah.
I just am not backing that plan up of equipping to make sure they're ready for game day.
Yeah. To further that illustration, and then I'm going to move on to the last point. You look at, now we're biased, we're in the South, so we're big SEC fans. When you look at the level of schools at the highest level in the SEC, the reason they're successful is they have a bench that is ready to step in at any point in time.
Yep.
Injury, draft, next man up. And they talk about that. So do we run our teams like that? Do we run our companies like that? You and I are sitting there shaking our head no together. And
but I was doing that just for our viewers, not for our podcast listeners. I didn't want the podcast listeners to know.
Yeah. And so I love this, right? You got to be communicating this because it has to be a priority, not only to you as a leader. You got to I'm not going to cover point 4, but John lays out an incredible model.
Yeah.
And the first one he talks about is model it. So leaders, before you go communicating this, you need to be modeling it so that then your people understand what that looks like. And that's the first step of the 5 M's that John gives us. Okay, now last point. All right, I really want to hear from you on this because you and I, we have a bent towards this. And John talks about we have to develop a relationship with those that we equip. And I think this is critical. This is the foundation, I think, to all influence. We call it, John calls it level 2, and the 5 levels of leadership that increase your influence by developing relationships. You cannot equip somebody and you cannot pull the best out of them and have them lead at higher levels unless you build a relationship with them.
Yep.
which is why leaders, you have to be very careful, depending on the size of your organization, how many direct reports you do have.
Right.
Because everything we're talking about here today, you can't do 7, 8, 9, 10 times your direct report. So be careful about that. Talk about you and how you lead and equip people by starting, because I know you do this so well, with the foundation of building a relationship with people and why that's so important.
Yeah, and thank you for giving me a lot of kudos on it, because I do believe that it is a strength of mine. I today, in admitting that, and hopefully not coming across as cocky or got all of that together, I must also admit that while it's a strength of mine, I'm not so sure it's a discipline of mine right now. And I believe that if you find something that you're very good at, you got to have the strength and recognize it's a strength, but you've got to have the discipline to keep it present when situations, responsibilities begin to shift around you. I was reminded of that recently. I was invited to stand in with somebody that used to work on our team, Chris, and I got to be in his wedding. And I went out with one of our teammates that also was in the wedding. And I got to spend, it was an hour and a half from our lodging to the event venue, which is where the rehearsal and the wedding was. So it was about 6.5 hours worth of drive time. And in this 6.5 hours of time, I had one of our leaders on our leadership team in the room, or in the car with me. And what occurred to me as I was on the plane coming home from that experience, it occurred to me how little I had been spending in cultivating that relationship. Now, was the relationship fine? Did we pick it right up where we left it the last time we went to play golf or ski or whatever we have done together recently? Absolutely we did, because of years and years and years of operating in my strengths. But here's what I discovered. You can have the strength, but not the discipline. And without both of them,
That's good.
You will not be effective in equipping
That's good.
without both the strength and the discipline to stay in that strength. And thank you for complimenting me. I do think I'm pretty good at that. How long have you and your wife and me and my wife been trying to get on the calendar for a dinner? Don't answer the question. It's been a long time, listeners. It's been a long time. But that's really important, because you and I both want to invite our better halves,
Yes.
let's be really clear
Yes.
if that's the case,
Yeah.
into what we do on a daily basis, because you and I both travel a lot. And yet today, as I'm telling this, I have the strength to do that and sit down with you and Sarah and me, you and Stephanie and Sarah would have a brilliant time. But do I have the discipline? And that's the question on this. You may have the strength or not, but you better have the discipline, whether you have the strength or not, to keep it present in your leadership.
Yeah, and listen, leaders, Mark brings up a really good point here. The discipline part of this is leaders, we default to saying, I don't have time to do that. I can't put that on my calendar. And so not only do you have to be intentional and disciplined about it, but you be creative about it. You are already making trips. You are already in meetings. You're already going to lunches. Mark just used a great example of he was intentional. It may have been unintentional, but he used the time of this car ride as intentionality to be able to help and equip, invest in, and build a relationship to a deeper level with one of our key leaders. So think about it creatively, because I know everybody's answer is, I don't have time to do that. Figure out time to do it, because it's key. All right, now listen, I'm going to throw it to you to close up, but I want to give you one last statement to let you react to. I deal with this. I know a lot of leaders probably deal with this as well. We have to. We have a little campaign around here called Free Mark, okay? Yeah. And he'll talk a little bit about this. But we have to, as leaders, let go of our desire to have direct control over situations inside our organization. John has taught us, if someone can do something 80% as good as we have, give it to them. It'll create a natural mentoring, equipping conversation, and then they're probably going to be able to do it better than you. Mm-hmm. As you wrap up for us, just react to that comment about us wanting to, especially with your change in leadership and owning the Maxwell leadership and the shift that you and John are making in your relationship of having some key decisions and key part of, our P&Ls and different things that you have to relinquish control of to get above all of that, to continue to equip and develop people and get out of the weeds of it.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.